had always been drawn to the idea of staying in remote, quiet places. There was something about the solitude that made me feel like I could reset, away from the chaos of everyday life. When I stumbled across a listing for an old farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, I couldn't resist. The pictures showed a charming historic home, surrounded by rolling hills and farmland as far as the eye could see. It seemed perfect for the week-long escape I had been craving. When I arrived, the farmhouse was even more beautiful than I had imagined. It stood alone, miles from the nearest neighbor, with its peeling white paint and weathered wood giving it a quaint, rustic feel. The large porch wrapped around the front, and the windows, though dusty, offered sweeping views of the countryside. There was an old barn out back, abandoned long ago from the looks of it, and the field stretched out endlessly, dotted with wildflowers and tall grass swaying in the wind. But as peaceful as it appeared, there was something about the place that felt off. Maybe it was the silence. A silence so deep that even the wind seemed muted. The air felt thick, almost oppressive, like the farmhouse had been frozen in time, and I was intruding on something long forgotten. On my first night, I brushed it off. It was just me getting used to the quiet, I told myself. I spent the day exploring the house, which was filled with antique furniture. An old wooden rocking chair in the corner of the living room, a grandfather clock that hadn't worked in years, and shelves lined with dusty knickknacks. There were old photographs on the walls, faded black and white images of the family who had lived there decades ago. They looked stern, almost somber, as if life on the farm had been more of a burden than a joy. I settled into the bedroom upstairs, the largest room in the house. It had a high, sloped ceiling and a window that overlooked the barn and the fields beyond. As night fell, the air inside the farmhouse grew chilly, much colder than it should have been for that time of year. I shrugged it off, figuring the old place just didn't have great insulation, and went to bed. The second night passed uneventfully, though I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old house settling, made me hyper-aware of the space around me. I found myself glancing over my shoulder constantly, feeling a strange, prickling sensation on the back of my neck. It was on the third night that things took a turn. I had just finished reading and was preparing to go to bed when I heard it, a loud bang from the attic, directly above my room. It was so sudden, so sharp, that it made me jump. I stared at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for the noise to come again, but the house had fallen silent once more. Curiosity and fear battled within me, but in the end, curiosity won out. Grabbing a flashlight, I made my way to the attic door. The stairs leading up were narrow and creaky, and as I climbed, I felt a cold draft sweep down from above, sending a shiver through me. I pushed open the attic door, the old wood creaking as it gave way. The attic was exactly what you'd expect, dusty, filled with forgotten relics of the past. Old furniture, trunks, and boxes stacked haphazardly, covered in a thick layer of grime. The air smelled musty, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I shone my flashlight around, searching for the source of the bang, but found nothing out of the ordinary. As I turned to leave, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A faint, melodic tune drifting through the house. It was a lullaby, one I hadn't heard in years. My grandmother used to sing it to me when I was a child, and hearing it now in this abandoned farmhouse was impossible. I stood frozen in the attic, straining to hear where the music was coming from, but I couldn't pinpoint it. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I hurried back downstairs, my heart racing, but the melody followed me, growing louder with every step. By the time I reached the bedroom, the lullaby had become distorted, warping into something almost unrecognizable, yet still eerily familiar. I locked the bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of what was happening. The music filled the house now, echoing off the walls, twisting and bending in ways that made my skin crawl. And then I heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, and they were coming from the hallway outside my room. The sound of heavy boots on the old wooden floorboards, pacing back and forth, just outside the door. I held my breath, gripping the flashlight tightly, listening as the footsteps stopped directly in front of my room. I waited, every muscle in my body tense, but the door never opened. The footsteps resumed, continuing their steady pace up and down the hallway. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed with fear. What was happening? Who, or what, was walking outside my room? In a desperate attempt to calm myself, I called the local authorities. My voice was shaky as I explained what was happening, but the dispatcher assured me they would send someone out to check. I hung up, clutching the phone in my hand, praying they would arrive quickly. When the authorities finally showed up, the footsteps and the music had stopped. I let them into the house, trying to explain the noises, but they found nothing unusual. No signs of anyone else in the house, no disturbances. They checked the attic, the hallways. Everything was as it should be. They left after reassuring me that it was probably just the old house settling, but I wasn't convinced. I didn't sleep that night. The farmhouse, once charming and peaceful, now felt like a trap, suffocating me with its oppressive silence. By morning, I had made up my mind. I was leaving. I packed my things as quickly as I could, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds, half expecting to hear the footsteps again. As I drove away from the farmhouse, I felt a weight lift from my chest, but the further I got, the colder I felt. It wasn't until I looked in the rearview mirror that I realized why. The farmhouse, now just a distant speck in the rear view, seemed to shimmer for a moment, as if something was watching me leave, its cold presence lingering long after I was gone. I had never been to this part of New Mexico before. The small town was charming, isolated, and almost too quaint. I was in town for a friend's wedding, and most of the wedding party had chosen to stay in one of the bigger hotels closer to the venue. But I preferred something quieter, more intimate, so I found a bed and breakfast on a deserted stretch of road just outside town. The pictures online showed a lovely old house with vintage decor and cozy rooms. It seemed perfect, until I got there. The B&B was even more isolated than I had imagined. The driveway leading up to it was long and lined with dry, brittle bushes that scraped against my car as I pulled in. The building itself was picturesque, but something about its emptiness felt unsettling. It sat alone, surrounded by open desert. No neighbors, no other buildings, just miles of barren land stretching out in every direction. When I arrived, the owner, an older woman named Evelyn, greeted me with a friendly but tired smile. She showed me to my room on the second floor, and as I followed her through the narrow, dimly lit hallway, I couldn't help but notice how quiet the place was. "You're my only guest this weekend," she said, almost apologetically. "Most people prefer the hotels in town, but I promise you'll have all the peace and quiet you need." I smiled, trying to shake off the unease that had settled over me. "That's exactly what I'm looking for," I lied. The room itself was charming in a rustic way. The bed was a four-poster with a heavy quilt draped over it, and there was a small TV on a rickety stand in the corner. The window offered a view of the desert beyond, with nothing but flat land and the occasional tumbleweed. It was quiet, too quiet. The only sound was the occasional creak of the old house settling. Still, I unpacked my things and settled in for what I hoped would be a relaxing stay. That first night, I tried to unwind. I turned on the TV, flipping through channels, but nothing caught my interest. The wind outside picked up, howling softly against the house, making the windows rattle. I told myself it was just the isolation getting to me. After all, I was used to the noise and bustle of the city. But as the night wore on, the strange feeling of being watched began to creep in. Around 10 p.m., I heard it, a series of knocks on my door. Not loud, but deliberate. I paused, the remote still in my hand, and listened. The knocks came again, 3 in quick succession. My heart began to race. I slowly got up, walked to the door, and opened it. No one was there. The hallway was empty, dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling. I stepped out, peering down both sides of the hallway, but there was no one. I checked the other rooms on the floor, all of them unoccupied. I tried to tell myself it was just the wind. This was an old house, after all, and old houses made strange noises. I went back inside and tried to shake off the eerie feeling, But about half an hour later, the knocking started again, this time louder, more insistent. I jumped up and rushed to the door, yanking it open. Again, nothing. The hallway was as empty as before, but the air felt different, heavier. Determined not to let my imagination get the better of me, I grabbed a flashlight and headed downstairs. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, and the old chandelier in the foyer cast long shadows on the walls. I stepped outside and circled the perimeter of the house. The wind whipped through the desert, and the dry branches of the bushes rustled ominously, but there was no one. No footprints in the dirt, no signs of life at all. Feeling foolish, I returned to my room, locked the door behind me, and tried to sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old house felt magnified in the silence of the night. I lay there for what felt like hours, my mind racing, and then I heard it, the whispers. At first, I thought it was the wind, but as I strained to listen, I realized it was more than that. The sounds were coming from the hallway. They were faint but unmistakable, soft, hushed voices murmuring just outside my door. I held my breath, trying to make out the words, but they were incoherent, like a conversation happening just out of earshot. I slowly got out of bed and tiptoed to the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I pressed my ear against the wood, and the whispers grew louder. They weren't just random sounds. They were words, strange, disjointed phrases that didn't make sense. I could catch snippets. "Don't open the door. He's coming back." I yanked the door open, fully expecting to see someone standing there, but once again, the hallway was empty. The whispers stopped abruptly, as if they had never been there at all. My hands were shaking as I slammed the door shut and locked it again. I backed away, my eyes fixed on the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The whispers started again, this time coming from the walls themselves. I felt surrounded, trapped in this old house with something I couldn't see. Panic rose in my chest. I turned on every light in the room and sat on the edge of the bed, trying to convince myself that I was just hearing things, that it was just the isolation playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong with this place. I stayed awake all night, the whispers continuing off and on until the first light of dawn finally crept through the window. The moment it was bright enough outside, I packed my things and left. I didn't even bother telling Evelyn goodbye. I just threw my bags into the car and sped off down the deserted road, not looking back. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me leave. The B&B grew smaller in my rearview mirror, but the memory of that night stayed with me, as vivid and unsettling as the whispers that had haunted me.